something that reaches beyond party lines, beyond the divisions that so often consume our debates. I want to talk about who we are as a people and the kind of nation we still have the power to become. Now, recently, I made a statement that some have said shook the political world. A statement directed at my successor, Donald Trump. And let me be clear, my words were not about one man. They were about all of us. Because the future of this country cannot and should not rest on the shoulders of any one individual. It rests on you. It rests on me. It rests on us together as citizens of the United States of America. You see, I've met farmers in Iowa who rise before dawn, their hands rough from years of work, but their eyes still full of hope for their children's future. I've met teachers in Georgia who dig into their own pockets to buy school supplies, not because it's easy, but because they believe every child deserves a chance to succeed. I've met veterans in Michigan who fought bravely overseas and came home determined to keep serving their communities. Mentoring, volunteering, building. These men and women, these ordinary Americans, are doing extraordinary things. And they remind us that real strength doesn't come from shouting the loudest. It comes from lifting one another up. So when I say to Mr. Trump, or to anyone else who seeks to lead this nation, that leadership is not about stoking fear, but about inspiring hope, I say it because I've seen firsthand what hope can do. I've seen it turn strangers into neighbors and neighbors into communities. I've seen it give young people the courage to dream big, even when the odds are stacked against them. I've seen it move a nation forward one step at a time. Now, make no mistake, America is not perfect. We have stumbled, we have argued, we have faced setbacks, but we have never stopped moving forward. Because deep down, we understand something essential, that change is never handed down from the top. Change happens when ordinary people, people like you, decide that tomorrow can be better than today, and then roll up their sleeves and get to work. So I call on you, not just as citizens, but as custodians of a great experiment, to reject cynicism, to reject division, to choose compassion over cruelty and truth over lies, to remember that our democracy is not a gift, it is a responsibility. And it depends on you. Because at the end of the day, this has never been about one man, there were one president, or even one election. It has always been about us, our values, our shared humanity, our belief that no matter how tough the road may seem, there is nothing Americans cannot do when we do it together. And so tonight, I leave you with the same words I have spoken before, words that still carry the power to guide us forward. Words that echo the spirit of every American who has ever stood up and said, I will not give up. I will not surrender. I will keep believing. A yes, we can. Yes, we can. Leadership is not about stoking fear. It's about inspiring hope. Too often, we see leaders who believe that the quickest way to gain control is by amplifying the anxieties people already carry in their hearts. They point fingers, they build walls, sometimes literal, sometimes emotional, and they tell people that the world is closing in on them, that their neighbors are their enemies, and that the future holds only danger. Fear can be powerful in the short term. It can make people cling tightly, it can silence opposition, and it can create an illusion of strength. But fear has never built a bridge, never lifted a community out of despair, never inspired a young child to dream bigger than their circumstances. Fear divides. Fear paralyzes. Fear tells us to shrink. Hope, on the other hand, is what has always moved humanity forward. It is hope that led immigrants to cross oceans in search of a better life. It is hope that carried civil rights activists through the fire hoses, the dogs, and the beatings because they believed that a freer, fairer America was possible. Hope is what drives teachers to stay after school with struggling students, what pushes doctors and nurses to work long shifts during a crisis, what gives everyday workers the strength to get up at dawn and provide for their families. Hope says, yes, this is hard, but it is worth it. Yes, there are obstacles, but there is a way forward. When a leader inspires hope, they don't ignore reality. They acknowledge the struggles and hardships people face, but they refuse to stop there. They paint a picture of what could be. They remind people of their own power, their own resilience, their own capacity to shape destiny. They say to the single mother working 2 jobs, your sacrifice matters. They say to the young man, in a forgotten town, your dreams are not too small. They say to the nation, we are stronger together than apart. Inspiring hope doesn't mean offering easy answers or false promises. It means challenging people to rise to their highest selves. It means believing that even in moments of uncertainty, there is room for courage, compassion, and cooperation. It means replacing the language of us versus them with the vision of a shared tomorrow, a tomorrow worth building side by side. Real strength comes not from shouting the loudest, but from lifting one another up. Too often, strength is mistaken for the ability to dominate a room, to speak over others, or to demand attention through volume and force. In politics, in business, and even in our communities, there are those who believe that raising their voice higher than anyone else makes them powerful. But true strength has never been about intimidation or the noise we can generate. It has always been about the quiet, steady acts of kindness, the courage to stand up for others, and the willingness to carry someone when they cannot carry themselves. Think about the parent who works long hours not for recognition, not to prove a point, but to put food on the table and keep the lights on for their children. That parent may not raise their voice or command attention, but the sacrifices they make embody a strength louder than any shout. Consider the nurse who holds the hand of a patient in pain, offering comfort in the silence of a hospital room. The world may never hear her voice, amplified on a stage, but her strength is undeniable in the compassion she gives. These acts do not come with applause, but they shape the fabric of our humanity. When a person chooses to lift others up, they acknowledge a deeper truth, that our lives are intertwined, that no one succeeds entirely on their own, and that the measure of our strength is found in how we treat those around us. History has shown us time and again that communities thrive, not because one individual shouted the loudest, but because people worked together, supported one another, and refused to leave anyone behind. The civil rights movement was not sustained by a single booming voice. It was sustained by millions of ordinary people, lifting one another, marching hand in hand, and refusing to give up until justice moved closer within reach. In our own daily lives, strength looks like mentoring a young student who feels unseen, encouraging a colleague who doubts themselves, or checking in on a neighbor who is struggling. These gestures may seem small, but collectively they are transformative. Shouting may draw attention for a moment, but lifting someone up creates ripples that last a lifetime. A word of encouragement, an act of support, a willingness to listen. These are the foundations of real leadership and real power. We live in a time when shouting has become common, where division and anger often fill the air. Yet the strongest among us are those who resist that temptation, who choose instead to lift, to build, and to unite. Strength is found in the quiet determination to make tomorrow better for someone else, in the humility to recognize that our voice does not need to drown others out, but can harmonize with theirs to create something greater than any of us alone. Change doesn't come from the top. It comes when ordinary people roll up their sleeves. Throughout history, it has been easy to imagine that progress is the work of presidents, kings, or great figures standing behind podiums. But the truth is, those in positions of power can only go so far. They can sign legislation, they can make speeches, they can set the tone. But real, lasting change is born in neighborhoods, in classrooms, in workplaces, and around kitchen tables where ordinary people decide to take extraordinary steps. It begins when people stop waiting for someone else to solve their problems and instead take ownership of the future they want to see. Consider the great movements that shape the world we live in today. The civil rights movement did not begin in the Oval Office. It began in churches, in small community gatherings, in the determination of men and women who refused to accept second-class citizenship. It began when Rosa Parks, an ordinary seamstress, decided she would not give up her seat on a bus. It began when students in Greensboro sat at a lunch counter and demanded dignity. These were not leaders in government. They were citizens whose courage forced the nation to confront its conscience. Think about the labor movement that gave us weekends, safer working conditions, and fairer wages. Those victories were not handed down by the powerful. They were won by workers, farmers, miners, and factory laborers who organized, who marched, who risked their livelihoods so that their children might have a better future. Their rolling up of sleeves was not symbolic, it was literal, as they labored during the day and fought for justice in the evenings, determined to change the conditions under which they lived. Even the fight for women's suffrage wasn't sparked by top officials, but by mothers, daughters, and sisters who refused to accept a system that silenced them. They organized rallies, endured ridicule, and suffered arrests, but they persisted. The power of their persistence reshaped democracies across the globe. These examples remind us that the heartbeat of change is found not in palaces or halls of power, but in the determination of everyday people who simply refuse to settle for less than justice and equality. In today's world, the same principle holds true. When communities come together to fight climate change, it isn't just because a leader declared it urgent, it's because young people marched in the streets demanding a livable planet. When neighborhoods rise against violence and poverty, it's not because a law alone transformed conditions, but because ordinary citizens decided to mentor children, open community centers, and support one another in times of hardship. Change happens when parents advocate for better schools, when doctors volunteer in underserved areas, when entrepreneurs create opportunities in forgotten towns. The notion that change comes from the top is not only misleading, it's dangerous. It encourages passivity, convincing people that they are powerless and that only those with titles can shape the world. But history tells us otherwise. Every great leap forward we've ever experienced as a nation, or as a world, has come from the energy and sacrifice of ordinary individuals who refuse to wait. Leaders at the top may eventually endorse those movements, may enshrine them into law, but only after the people demanded it with enough force and persistence to be heard. Rolling up your sleeves means embracing the responsibility of citizenship. It means being willing to engage, to participate, to sacrifice time and energy for the greater good. It doesn't always mean marching in the streets. It can mean tutoring a child, volunteering at a shelter, voting in every election, or simply listening to those who feel unheard. These acts, multiplied across millions of people, generate the kind of momentum that no government alone could create. The story of change is, and has always been, the story of ordinary people daring to do extraordinary things. It is the story of those who see injustice and decide to stand against it, of those who see suffering and decide to ease it, of those who see division and choose to build bridges instead. When ordinary people roll up their sleeves, they remind us that democracy is not a spectator sport, that progress is not guaranteed, and that the future is always written by those who are willing to work for it. Our democracy is not a gift. It is a responsibility. It is tempting to think of democracy as something that was handed down to us, fully formed and permanent, as though it were carved into stone and placed before us to guard. But democracy is not a monument. It is a living, breathing system that depends entirely on the people who sustain it. It is not preserved by the words written on old documents alone, but by the actions of citizens who choose every day to uphold its principles and push it closer to its ideals. When the founders crafted the Constitution, they did not hand us a perfect nation. They handed us a challenge, a framework upon which each generation would have to build. The words, "with the people," were not a conclusion, but an invitation for every American, regardless of circumstance, to take ownership of the project of self-government. And that project is never finished. It is not something we inherit and sit upon. It is something we inherit and must continually earn through vigilance, participation, and sacrifice. Democracy is not maintained by slogans or symbols alone. It requires citizens who are willing to engage in the sometimes frustrating, often difficult work of debate, compromise, and progress. It requires voters who show up not only in presidential elections, but in the smallest local contests, because the decisions made at the school board, the city council, and the state legislature ripple out into the fabric of our communities. It requires people to educate themselves, to listen to one another even when they disagree, to resist the easy comfort of division, and to search for common ground. History shows us what happens when responsibility is neglected. When people become cynical and disengage, when they assume their voice does not matter, democracy begins to erode. Authoritarianism doesn't arrive overnight. It creeps in when people stop believing they are guardians of their own freedom. It thrives when fear replaces dialogue and when citizens surrender their duty to hold leaders accountable. We cannot afford to treat democracy as something fragile and temporary that will simply protect itself. It is only as strong as the people who defend it. Responsibility also means recognizing that democracy is not just about rights, it is about obligations. It is about how we treat our neighbors, how we respect differences, how we ensure that the voices of the marginalized are heard as clearly as the voices of the powerful. A healthy democracy demands that we protect the vote, safeguard free speech, and defend the rule of law. But it also demands that we look inward, that we confront our own biases, and that we refuse to give in to hatred or apathy. Ordinary people have always been the true keepers of democracy. It was citizens who marched for civil rights, who fought for the right of women to vote, who demanded labor protections and environmental safeguards. These victories did not emerge from the generosity of leaders. They were won by citizens who accepted their responsibility to act. They remind us that democracy is never a spectator sport. It thrives only when people roll up their sleeves and do the work of shaping it, preserving it, and passing it on stronger than they found it. To see democracy as a responsibility is to understand that every choice we make matters. Every vote, every conversation, every act of courage or compassion becomes a thread in the great fabric of our nation. We are not passive recipients of freedom. We are active participants in its survival, its growth, and its promise. No matter how tough the road, there is nothing Americans cannot do when we do it together. Yes, we can. The story of this nation has always been one of resilience, of a people who, when faced with challenges that seemed insurmountable, discovered within themselves a spirit stronger than any obstacle. From the earliest days of independence, when farmers and blacksmiths stood against one of the most powerful empires in the world, to the struggles for equality and justice that continue in our own time, America has always proven that unity is our greatest strength. When the road has been hard, Americans have never chosen to surrender. During the Great Depression, families who had lost everything found ways to share what little they had with neighbors. In the dark days of World War II, men and women from every walk of life came together. Soldiers on the front lines, workers in factories, children collecting scraps of metal, all contributing to a cause larger than themselves. After the attacks of September 11th, firefighters rushed into burning buildings, strangers stood in long lines to give blood, and communities wrapped grieving families in love. These moments of trial revealed something enduring about the American character. When we act together, we can bear any burden and overcome any trial. The truth is, We will always face hardships. The road ahead will not always be smooth. Economic uncertainty, political division, global threats. These are real and pressing challenges. But history reminds us that America has never been defined by its difficulties. We have always been defined by how we respond to them. When we choose fear, we falter. But when we choose unity, when we look out for one another, when we believe that our destinies are bound together, we discover that there is no mountain too tall, no storm too fierce, no road too long. The strength of America has never come from the wealth of a few or the power of a select group at the top. It has always come from ordinary people who roll up their sleeves, who take care of their families, who stand up for their neighbors, and who believe that their small acts of courage and kindness can shape the future. Together, those small acts become a force greater than fear, greater than hate, greater than division. And it is in that spirit that we say again and again, yes, we can